fleeing for life. Larry could not run fast enough. Every time he looked back, he saw a familiar face hunting him down. As he turned the corner, he gasped for breath and his mind was racing. He thought about how he got into this mess and how he might not escape it. The possibility of being killed was real this time. The gang was serious and his options were exhausted. He was exhausted too. At some point, he wasn't sure when or how they lost his trail. Sweat poured off his brow as he pondered his imminent demise. His heart felt like it could beat out of his chest if he tried to run any further. Even though the gang member lost sight of him, every corner he went around, he was there, even if only in his thoughts. It took what seemed to be hours before he felt safe enough to come out into the open space in the park. He knew he needed to sit down, and the bench seemed to be calling his name. He took a few minutes to contemplate and reluctantly made his way over to it and sat down. Beads of perspiration gathered as he wrestled with the thought of the gang ending his life, or the heat arresting him if he kept his allegiance to them. Just then, 3 young boys kicked dirt up as they sped toward him on their bikes. It startled him. In his desperation, he had just begun to pray and had closed his eyes. The preteen boys seemed to be interested in what Larry was doing with the sticks he had gathered. They politely asked, "What are you doing with those sticks?" The youngest boy responded for Larry, "Can't you see he's building an altar?" Larry was dumbfounded that this boy would say such a thing. Before he could respond, another boy asked, "Oh, can you tell us a Bible story, mister?" Little did they know, Larry's father was a pastor, and Larry knew many Bible stories, but it had been a long time. He felt a bit awkward and out of his element, but the words began to flow, and before he knew it, he was sharing the word of God with these kids he'd just met. Oddly enough, he had just prayed that God spare his life. If God spared him, he told God he would turn from his wicked life and serve him all his days. After the story, the kids sped off as quickly as they had approached. He was left to wonder if the encounter had even happened. His father was on his heart, so he called him for help. His father decided the best way to help his son was to buy him an airline ticket to Ohio, where the only safe friend left resided. This friend happened to be a former Marine who was a female. When he prayed, God told him when he saw an eye, he would know he was close. As the plane landed, he didn't see any eyes, but he saw the huge letter I in the IX center sign. He laughed for the first time, noting that God always shows up in ways we don't expect. Larry was so determined to begin fresh, he walked 40 miles to her town. With very little money, the clothes on his back, and the will to live, he boldly knocked on her door. The door swung open and she appeared just as caught off guard as he thought she would. It didn't take long before she welcomed him in with open arms, overjoyed that he trusted her to help him. They had a brief visit, but it became apparent it wasn't suitable for him to stay there. She told him about a shelter in Painesville Township on Freedom Road. Freedom. That seemed to be what he was seeking, he thought. Easter was fast approaching and his life was a mess. As he walked into the Freedom Road shelter for the first night, he scrambled with how to use a fork. Most of his adult life had been spent incarcerated. His rap sheet was so long it made the judge take note during his parole hearings. He was off parole now and had to learn how to adapt. The transition wasn't easy, but it was better than the alternative, he thought. That night at the shelter there was going to be a Bible study. It would be a good thing for him, he decided, especially since nothing else had worked. As everyone finished up eating that night, I entered the room. Larry later told me I wasn't what he'd expected. A short, curly-haired younger woman who seemed to relate pretty well to the shelter guests. I sat down at the table and told the guests that I was sorry, but the Bible study leader was ill. Larry said that before he could get discouraged, I had opened the Bible and started reading the Easter story from Luke. Fewer than 3 minutes into the reading, his feet hit the floor and his hands were in complete submission above his head. Waving them wildly and screaming at the top of his lungs, he exclaimed, "God is real, Sister Judy! God is real!" Tears streamed down his face, and the guys close by seemed to think he had lost his mind. Staring at him in amazement, they fell silent. I was stunned and nearly lost my place. "He is real, Brother Larry," I answered. He made a promise to completely sell out to Jesus and use all the energy he had been using to serve Satan to help God in his kingdom. Before the week was out, he volunteered to do odd jobs around the shelter, obtained a full-time job, kept his sobriety, found a home church, and vowed to find a good woman of God. He kept his promises, and before long, he met the worship leader at his church and began dating her. She had been homeless the year prior and had stayed at Project Hope with her 3 children. He moved out, got married, became a stepdad, was promoted many times at work, served in leadership in his church, got ordained, served as a trustee at Project Hope, and pastored at 3 churches with his wife, who also got ordained. During his time volunteering at the shelter with his wife, he reminded others that he too slept in a bed there, and if he could change, anyone could do the same. He and his wife received the shelter's annual Blessings Award for their service that went above and beyond to restore hope and renew lives for shelter guests. Guests would line up to be prayed for by him. Many were brought to redemption, many were healed, and many came to or returned to Christ through his service. His wife would lead worship with her beautiful, anointed singing, and he would preach. The combination took the place by storm. At one point, a practicing Satanist and a Wiccan were brought to their knees. In 2015, he and his wife came back to visit. She was getting her counseling degree and needed to interview me for a paper. During the visit, she sat at the piano in Project Hope's new chapel and began to play and sing one of the songs on her latest album. Humbled by God's grace, tears poured down Larry's face as he thanked me. God has brought me a mighty long way, Sister Judy, he cried out. As they were pulling out of the driveway, I stopped them to yell out one last question. How many people have you baptized since you began as pastors? I think we're at just more than 100 people now, they replied. I couldn't stop laughing. I'm still filled with joy by how the seeds have multiplied and encouraged them to keep going. We're just getting started, Sister Judy, he shouted with a grin as they headed out to their next assignment. Now let's watch.
Hey, mister, what are you doing with those sticks?
Can't you see he's building an altar?
Oh, can you tell us a Bible story, mister? You know, my father was a pastor. I'm going to tell you a story from the Word of God. Hey, Dad, I was just talking about you. I need some help. Yeah, I know, but I can't hide anywhere around here. Ohio? Can't afford a plane ticket. You will. Okay, I'll look for her. Thanks, Dad.
Welcome to Project Hope. If you're hungry, we are just about to serve dinner. Can I help you with that?
Most of my adult life I spent incarcerated, and I have the rap sheet to prove it. It's been hard learning how to adapt.
You know, there's going to be a Bible study tonight at the shelter. Would you be interested in attending?
I think that would be a great thing for me.
A reading from the Gospel according to Luke.
God is real, Sister Judy! God is real!
He is real, Brother Larry. And now we will hear a few words from the recipient of this year's Blessings Award. Larry?
It's been years since I first stepped into Project Hope. In that time, I have volunteered to do odd jobs at the shelter. I have a full-time job. I have kept my sobriety. I found a home church, and I have found a woman of God. Together, my wife and I have pastored 3 churches. We too slept in beds at Project Hope, and if I could change, anyone could do the same. God has taken me a mighty long way. My wife and I have baptized about 100 people now, and we're just getting started.